good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome. Whichever part of the world and whatever time zone you are in, thank you for joining us for the 2021 edition of the Black Consciousness Festival. This year, we are inviting you to shift. Join with amazing people across the world as we explore the many ways we, as people of African descent, grow, cultivate, produce, share, and rebirth ourselves. Through our ancestral knowledge, historical legacy, pride, power, and practice, let's celebrate the individual and collective ways we navigate through life. Together, we continue to walk in pride, power, and practice. Enjoy the session.
We have Michelle Martineau and we have Tessa Naime, who will talk to us about the question of identity in the French Antilles and the question of colonization and the efforts for decolonization.
Laisser les femmes parler maintenant.
So I will let the ladies speak. Maybe Michelle will start, and she will tell us what is the work she's doing in this issue of identity and how she is progressing in this question of identity and resistance. Hello, everyone. I am Michelle Martineau. I am a doctorate student at the 4th year in the University of Montreal, and I work on the identity issue from 2003 to 2009 in Guadeloupe. Before that, I wrote a memoir on the still in Guadeloupe of the national issue in 1990. And globally, what has allowed me to interest me in the identity issue is when I was doing my research memo during my master's. I noticed there was very little interest in this question, in this issue. And so my thesis is a continuity of my memoir. And so what I'm trying to demonstrate is in what the complexity of the identity issue that's stuck between French culture, negritude, and why is this complexity of identity has an impact on the future of Guadeloupe, and how does it affect how the Guadeloupe will identify? Will they prefer economic independence, or will they prefer the status quo, which means maintaining relationships with France? So I am in the drafting phase, and I'm trying to interview different people from the political world and the political unions and the cultural associations. And next to that, I launched in 2020 a blog named Caribbean Identities. And it's the blog that treats the issues of Caribbean issues and the diaspora. I don't talk only about the French Antilles. I talk about other Caribbean islands like Trinidad and Tobago. So the objective is to publicize the science and to allow a more direct access to Guadeloupe's men and women who doesn't have the opportunity to educate themselves as I do 24/7. And also to talk about topics that will interest men and women from Guadeloupe. We're going to talk throughout our discussion. We did not have access to the history of Caribbean and what was happening outside. We were very much, our education was very French-centric. I think it's really interesting.
C'est très important de faire savoir ce qui se passe dans l'histoire des
I think it's very interesting for us to know what's happening in Guadeloupe history, people who are living in Guadeloupe. This idea of increasing awareness and visibility in what's happening in the Caribbean, I think it's very important as far as the political aspect, but it's also very important for people who live in the country. And right now, we know that there are a lot happening in the French Antilles, a lot of resistance movements. So Tessa, can you please tell us about what's going on and how you are capturing all of these issues? So Tessa, hello, thank you. I've created Neg, a magazine that addresses the resistance, both our cultural and intellectual. And we are talking about essentially on Guadeloupe and Martinique and Haiti, because already this magazine, right now we are in a period of colonial resistance. It started with the destruction of the certain resistance monuments in Martinique. And this was something that was done by, this resistance was done through by Martinique's youth, and who wanted to have themselves for, who wanted to help get themselves heard. And so that often, that pushed me to begin this magazine and to give them a voice and to really work towards the emancipation of our people. So the NEG magazine was really created in this context that was a fairly hot concept. We even had the opportunity to write an article on our collective memory. When we talk about the destruction of colonial symbols, we talk about the building a collective memory, and it does get close to our Black identity. As a founder of the Black identity, these youth wanted to express themselves and say what was for them their identity and what is included in that identity and what we should exclude in this identity. So it's in process of decolonization. It really inspired this creation of my magazine, and I thank them for that. We are in a period in Guadeloupe. We have a lot of social and political movements in terms of political. Michelle will be able to treat this issue better. But yes, I am very much, I really follow this. And the first number of the magazine talked about the scandal of, it's a scandal that really touches the Black populations. And today constitutes a crime of state. And the state is the first guilty in this case. And it's really important to, and it's ensure that we're really, it was really important for us to get these youth who had who were angry about being poisoned, and very important for us to help them hear their voice. It's their bodies, it is their health, it is their future, and it's all that has been affected. And this is the resistance of the people to the government and the resistance to the mode of governance. And all this concerns geopolitics. So Michelle, can you please talk to us about how you saw in your research, how those people reacted to try to talk to these people who have the power and who took this decision, who didn't affect the people of Guadeloupe. I have not done the interviews yet for my thesis, but I can talk about my memories when I interviewed Peter Montas, who is the former leader of the NKP. It's an organization, it's an inter-organization association, and who highlighted the government practices. How could I say that were considered colonial practices? And Mr. Dimota and Mr. Winet, who's also a former activist, who's very well known in Guadeloupe and who's known for his very radical positions. Both of them significated that it was very important for us to emancipate ourselves, emancipate Guadeloupe, and for them, independence is the ultimate answer and ultimate outcome to all the ills that the suffering in Guadeloupe. This is an issue that is very polarizing in Guadeloupe. A lot of Guadeloupeans do not adhere to this thought. They want to stay either with the status quo or maybe eventually some kind of autonomy. But when we talk to them to this issue of the independence, we immediately address the identity. Is independence, is uh, all our traditions that come back, our dances, our culture, the Black identity, for example, traditional meals, the drums that go play in front of the mayor's office. It's also the Creole language that is also resurfacing. There's all of that. So it's really the will to really remove ourselves from the French state, from its management, from its politics, and from its culture. That's very clear. I know the work of Demota, and it's very important to know that this issue of Black identity, this question of wanting a change, of resistance, is really present in this moment. And everything that has affected in the Caribbean, from Haiti, even in Puerto Rico and other islands, it is linked to this idea of being Black. And so, Tessa, you said that you did some research on Haiti and Guadeloupe and Martinique on this idea of being Black and how we were affected with these decisions. How is that linked to the race issue? That's a very heavy loaded question. My second magazine, the second issue of my magazine, was treating the issue of identity, gathered several different actors in Martinique and Guadeloupe. We are not yet any Haitian speakers, but what I've noticed on this issue of Black identity, they were not all in agreement. There is a lot of divergence of what it means to be Black uh, in a situation, in a society, a post-colonial society. And very often when we ask for them, what is the identity, what is the Guadeloupean identity, they don't know what ethnic groups are included. And so we can really affect a lot of division. So we have a lot of immigration from Syria and from Lebanese. We have a lot of this group that is really also very present, are Afro-Indians. And so we do not have a single unique identity. We don't have one identity of what this identity means. And that's what really stayed with me. There is not a massive solidarity. And so maybe it's something, as Michelle was saying, that it was impacting the situation in our islands, because already perhaps we should agree on what is that identity and what to hope for something else. And to talking with these people, that's what I noticed. Either we only include certain ethnic groups, or we put in all ethnic groups. And now we have to deconstruct the identity. If identity is created in a society that is being deconstructed, so we have to also deconstruct this. So for me, I think I'm still confused at this level. I don't, I have a feeling of being confronted to several different point of views. Everyone agrees that we have to love our native land, but does everybody agree onto what this identity? Let's not lie to ourselves. It's right now it's no. And so this identity is how to define it. And that's what interests me in this second number, and to go towards people and ask them how would they define their identity and how are they living this Black identity. I think it's a very important question, in a question where where we still live in the colonialism, when we talk about decolonization, and not only when we see in the situation we are in the when the Béquets, all which are descendants from French colonizers. And I think there's a lot of work to be done as to what the Black identity has to be a central piece of identifying our identity.
Michel,
And
qu'est-ce
Michelle,
que tu penses de cette question-là? Cette question
what do you think of this issue?
tous ces avis sur cette
What do you think
identité.
on these different ideas on the
C'est ça, les
identity of
Guadeloupéens.
Guadeloupe? Who are the Guadeloupeans? So that is the question that I would like to talk. It's part. It's essential of my thesis. I've read a lot of different articles. I've read some articles by Henri Gaudier, who talked about this idea of identity in Guadeloupe. And by studying the unions, the union movements, and in all honesty, I am on the same, I have to believe the same thing as Tessa. When you look at all the testimonies and forget the outside of any scientific observation made by any authors, when you see within the population, there is really a divergence as to what means their identity, because they self-identify according to the elements that they know, whether it be the stories, whether it be collective or individual. Certain people consider themselves from Guadeloupe, whether it be from African descent or of Indian descent. So you already have this aspect, not singular, but individual. This individual aspect to identity, and to transpose this individual identity to the collective, where you have communities with different people, and to try to gather the population, unite the population around a single project in view of creating a national Guadeloupean nation. That would be a problem. It's not just it's not the only movement of the independent movement. There's also the political actors who are more traditional, whether they be right or left, and who then they will have another definition of identity. And so they're going to talk more about creolization of race mixing. It's when you have actors from the union world who give you a definition of what they mean by being Black. Eventually, they will add the Indian Guadeloupean identity. But when you have other actors who will talk to you about from creolization and creolization, and so they will going to include the French acculturation in the Guadeloupean identity. Of course, it's going to cause issues. So that's what happened in 2003. So what happened in 2003, we asked the Guadeloupean people if they wanted to reunite two institutions in a single assembly. There were manipulations. It was not a question of independence or anything else, except that the issue of independence came back during the debates, and the Guadeloupeans voted massively against the unique assembly. And what I've seen in television and radio archives is that those people, of course, the older generation were always saying, we are French, we don't see why we should vote for these type of things. The issue was supposed to have been settled, quote unquote, since 2003. And so for now, we do have, like, the identity issue has come back. There was not an issue of independence. The issue of independence was not visible in the debates, except for me, whenever we talk about identity, for me, the issue of statues always comes back. Independently, however we perceive ourselves and how we see history, or however we feel linked, and we feel, starting from my self-identification, how do I perceive my island? Do I see an independent island, an autonomous island, or an island who will keep being in relationship with friends? It's not easy. I hope I was clear. How I perceive my island. I really love this phrase. It's not easy to answer this question because it's still in the news right now. It's a very sensitive issue. I may not look it, but it's a very sensitive issue. Right now, we're talking amongst ourselves without any issues, and we don't talk without raising our voices. But it can cause some very heavy debates. So I've already seen this in family reunions. We're not going to talk about independence and identity. It can go very, very far in discussions. So it's very interesting how I perceive my island. We talk about identity and we talk about independence. So Tessa, what does the youth saying? I would be very interested to know what the youth are saying. How do they see identity and independence? And this issue of the single assembly, I don't know if the magazine covered it or not, but I would like to know what came out of this issue with the assembly. The magazine has not treated the issue of the single assembly because we're very new. We're basically a baby. And so the question is, let's go with so what do the youth say? And I think I consider myself part of the youth. And this generation is taking on this issue a lot more profoundly. And they study more the question. Why? Because I believe we are in a period where there is a detachment a detachment that is happening right now with France individually, with the idea of feeling ourselves, considering ourselves French. I don't want to talk about to everyone, but I think it is the impression that I have. I have no. Why do I say that? I say that I noticed the rise of independent alternative media, and who want to promote this cultural identity and who want to talk about the cultural, which is between language, and that we agree on these these cultural elements. And we want to learn about the history of our territories. And it's just a history that we did not necessarily learn when we were in school. And is to create this new specter, is to contest the media order and to really create our own space, our own media space. And for me, it seems to be like a form of resistance and a form of emancipation. And so I think if we are in this phase of demanding our own identity, we are in a process of reclaiming our cultural legacy. I think there was some lack in our education, and the fact that we have so many medias and who are using education methods, who publish research. I could cite other media like Mwaka. We have it now. There are a lot of young people who are creating media channels, and these media are completely independent ideologically. They are created by people who are self-determining their identity and saying we are the new identity. We are doing a breakup with the older generation. This is what I feel is happening with the youth. To say that all the youth is for independence, I think that would be false. However, I think we can agree to say that the youth is saying that the system in which we are living is no longer good for us, and that we have to resist that. And I'm very proud to be part of this generation. And it's a generation that's saying, me, I am not negotiating my identity. My identity exists, and I do not forget it. It does not come after my nationality. And a lot of people are breaking down the idea, the concept of identity from nationality. And I think it's a generation that is ready to emancipate itself from a lot of things. And I think for us, we want to create ourselves is resisting, is impose our vision to the world, is impose to the world what the young Guadeloupeans and what the young Haitian and Martinicans think. We have to say that we think this, and we are the generation that is coming up, and we are not going to shut up. And I think it's really magical to see this movement, to see this emancipation movement, and to see that these young people are interrogating their society. And I think that is what the interesting thing is. Even beyond these political, even beyond the political, and the people are actually interrogating their society, and that is, for me, is magical. I talk with a lot of passion. I said, yes, it's just beautiful to see that. And I do not negotiate my identity. You talked about imposing our vision, your vision. But would it not be mostly to share our vision, because there was a vision imposed upon us? So for the people who lived in the islands who were colonized, the vision was imposed upon us, and this vision that was not our vision.
Je pense qu'il y a un renversement de code, en fait. Il y a un renversement.
I think that there is sort of reversal of coding. There's a reversal of this this reversal of this idea that we stay in our place as colonized people, and we want to be decolonized. I feel that there is a reversal. I think it's time for us to break up with that and to position ourselves, and to really position ourselves and to create our own place and say, my space is here and nobody will touch it. That's what I think that we will do in the media. And that's why when I see all the media that are being created, there is a podcast that interests in everything that is actors, all the associations, all the cultural issues, who are normalizing Black success. And for me, this is what we did not know. And I think that it's that we feel the need to publicize this. And it's the work of publicizing that is really incredible. It's really incredible. And I think this idea, the vision of the Guadeloupean people, of these youth who do not want to negotiate, it's also to answer this question of the loss of collective memory. I think it's very important what you're doing right now. And for the people like Elito Mota and the unions from the former generation, they send a lot of letters. They're at the embassies. But what are the youth doing? What are you doing right now to travel and to share your stories? So how are you taking advantage of all these new media, of all these resources that you have? Michelle?
C'est sûr que j'utilise en fait simplement les réseaux sociaux.
Me, myself, I use the social media mainly. It's for sure that I use my position as a researcher to point the finger at such and such news broadcast from the traditional media that traditional media much cover. I say, for example, in Haiti, there is a diplomatic conflict between Haiti and Santo Domingo. And what the Dominican government did is that they suspended indefinitely the visas, even for the students, for Haitians. We already know the situation that's always been strained between Haiti and Dominican Republic. And we talked about on the Caribbean identity of the massacre of 1937, of there's this issue of race and colorism. When you take these kind of events that are not necessarily highlighted, whether it be by national media or even in our own countries, in our own islands, may I say, yes, there's this thing that happened. And so what people do after, and what's interesting is that people start sharing. And I remember there was like a French media that said that Haiti was a country that was damned. When I saw this, I could not stay insensible. So I created a post to show why there was so many earthquakes. This post was shared, I don't know how many hundreds of shares and tweets, and people were very happy with it. And yes, traditional media, we still have a generation that goes tunes in at 7 to the news, but more and more people use social media to inform themselves. And so I use social media to bring clear and concrete information. We know that there is fake information, fake news, and this you do have that the counter verification that needs to be done. But but I only work with those media: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and in addition to my blog, of course. And that's how I try to bring my own contribution. I think it's very important because we can touch more people. So Tessa, can you talk to us about what you're doing with the magazine?
L'objectif, je dirais, du magazine, c'est comme je l'avais déjà présenté.
The objective of the magazine, as I had already said, is to really interrogate this slavish society that we work in. I believe that we do need to go back to our territories and to see them flourish. And so our magazine is to create a form of cohesion and solidarity to allow this Black consciousness to flourish. I think it's important to know our history, to appropriate the public issue, and to really to make sure that nobody is marginalized and to make sure that everybody is heard. We have some people who have articles who are offered by traditional media that do not make any effort on that side. I'm not afraid to say it because I believe that a lot of young people can feel a little bit they can feel left out when in certain topics that really concern them profoundly. I remember, for example, the events on the destruction of colonial symbols. I remember a lot of articles in the traditional media were essentially to condemn these acts. There was a form of position that was taken, and so the oppressed were never given the word, and who had enough of being oppressed and who were destroying the symbols of their colonialism. And so we have these media who are always taking us to this colonialism, of this position of being colonized. And we don't want the youth to react, and we do not give this space to react. They don't give us this space. So as a youth, as a young person, we just want to go around this. And this is what explains the creation of these new media. Maybe we don't realize it, but there's a real Black consciousness that is rising. I really love the idea that we use the idea of the Black consciousness and the idea of colorism. The Guadeloupeans, for example, do not agree on what the Guadeloupe identity is. But however, does this loss of history, this loss of collective memory affected this confusion on the identity of Guadeloupe? I know that in the other islands, for example, there are people who say, I'm not Black. They do not want to identify as Black.
métissée. Moi, je suis un peu
Yes, we are of course mixed. Me, I am mixed also, but I'm not going to say that I'm black. But some people do not want to say that they are black. I remember when I was in primary school, there was a girl who was darker than I was, and she was telling me that she was white and that she was white and that she had an issue with her skin. I knew that was not true, but she did not want to identify as black. There was a sort of shame in being black.
En Guadeloupe, je pense qu'on dit les
I know that
chabines.
in Guadeloupe, we say the Chabines. People prefer the Chabine. People prefer. There's all these issues that come out of the islands in the
Alors, est-ce que
Caribbean. So does this loss of memory,
ces choses qui sont sorties,
all these issues that came out, has that affected the reality of today?
Je peux commencer. Alors, je vais
This
essayer
is
de
Michelle.
répondre.
I'm going to try to answer that. It's true that when we see historically, when we look at the Caribbean in general,
une question de classe, de race et de genre.
the Caribbean societies are built on a issue of race and people. When we looked at the pyramid scale in the Antilles, when you see the top of the scale, usually you have people who have clear skin, who have light skin. Those are people who were people from the metropole who were white. When you get to the bottom of the pyramid, it was people black, was a black people who will have trades who are not valued. And if we go back to the colonization era, it's what was happening during colonization. And so, yes, there was the abolition of slavery, and we said that the black was free, except that the next day after abolition, we asked the slave to go back to work for his master. Yes, perhaps he was free, but the cycle was never continued. The cycle was never broken. And we know also that there was with colonization that was a lot of racism, and that affected the way how the societies were built and who had devastating effects. And it's true that in the Antilles, there is you have these generation, these racial ruptures, but there is also cleavages within our communities. I am very conscious of my own privileges as a woman, as a black woman, but as a black woman with light skin. I know it's very pejorative, but when you look at all of that, when people say, "Oh, but she said, well, she has nice hair. She has good hair, but your hair is not good. She has a nice face. Her nose is not too wide. She has a very fine nose." I know all that. There is a sort of confusion because for me, identity is linked to race in the Antilles. And when you have all these, yes, people will tell you, yeah, I'm black, but I have a descendant from India, or I have an ancestor from Syria. And always for us to show that we've been mixed, that we're not completely black. It is something that people have a lot of trouble assuming. I know that I came from a mixed family, but I define myself as a black woman. But to do this work, it is a form of decolonization of the mind. It's going to take a lot of time.
Ça va prendre énormément de temps. Et ce moment,
it's true, it's going to take a lot of time. And this moment is very important because when you said that Elide Mutar had talked about emancipating ourselves, and Tessa said that the young are doing exactly that. And so, Tessa, what do you think of all this? I think this issue of the colorism, I agree with Michelle. You can see that it's still very present. It's still very prevalent. It was there with our parents, it was there with our ancestors. So it's very hard to finish. But this question of colorism, we find it a lot. A lot of the media creators address that in history and the problematic related to race. We also learned to decolonize our language and to use our own language, because this language that we have, that we learned Creole, that people are rejecting the term Creole. This language contains a lot of expressions on a lot of there's a lot of expression on the racial hierarchy. For example, Chabin, Chabin. When we talk about, there are other terms of Indian bastard. There's different, whether it was a mulatress, whether it was different terms that were based on devaluing the Black blood and the Black legacy. And the more and more this generation wants to question these terms and not use them anymore. For example, the word Shabin, I think we all realize this, but we understand that the work is going to be very long and tiring. And we were raised on this issue, on the issue of skin, and we had people who were telling me that they were either devalued by their people, or they were valued for being light skin. So it's something that is very present here, and it's very sad. And so perhaps because we don't know well our history, and maybe this will be a condition of colonization. Maybe the Black body, if I say that I have Black blood, if I'm too Black, I bring myself back to this idea of colonization. So perhaps there's a whole thinking matrix behind that, and we have to deconstruct this idea, and we cannot continue. And if we have to if we want a collective movement, we need people who love themselves. We need people who accept themselves and who assume who they are. And that is what leads to emancipation. If we don't have people who love themselves as people of African descent and who assume this Black heritage, that is the basis of this imitation this is the basis of emancipation. We need that collective identity and that collective memory. I love that. We have to love ourselves. I love that.
Notre identité collective.
Our
Et c'est beaucoup de travaux à faire.
collective
Alors,
identity, and it's a lot of work to do. So where do we start?
qui veut essayer?
Who's going to start? Where should we start? Already you did.
Avec la sensibilisation.
You started with the awareness building, and this idea of collective memory is very important. But what do we need to do?
Alors,
Moi, je pense que l'élément principal, en fait.
Me, I think that the main element on this way is the idea of emancipation and the self-love.
Il y a un livre qui s'appelle comme ça, l'estime de
There's a
soi des
book,
Noirs, ouais.
the Black self-esteem. There's still something in Black people, and I think that I think it's the principal element is education. Education on the younger generation, and perhaps there was some lack in this education, and so this to allow our child to assume themselves to as Black. And I remember when I was young,
soleil.
yeah, we had parents telling kids don't stay too long in the sun, which means don't stay long. It means don't become too tan, so you don't become darker than you are. So what is the problem with becoming darker? What is the problem with melanin? So it's a real question. And I think that it needs to start within the home. And it's always say that the school is not enough to educate a child, to learn, teach the children to love themselves, to accept themselves, to accept their heritage. This has to be done within the home, within the family. And for me, I think it's the different elements, but I think that we have to put everything on education. And Michelle, or do you agree with that? I agree with Tessa. I think anyway, it's a point that has that have raised a researcher, and she had worked at the valorization of Creole, and she had explained why Creole it was between in the 50s and 60s we were forbidden from talking, so there's a whole work to be done to recognize Creole in 2010. You had road signs that were both in Creole and in French. And it's true, education goes through the home, first of all. But if we have a government that continues to put forth the French culture instead of Guadeloupean culture, it's going to be complicated. And if we go outside of the rules, then we can be perceived as a threat because where does education live? Education should lead to intellectual emancipation and to allow population to think and to take decisions in certain situations. and they will end up asking either independence or autonomy. And so, of course, the work has to be done individually within the families, but it's also a work that has to be done at the state level. And I think this is where it's going to be more complicated. And we already see that. We see, for example, in France, the notion of decolonization. But we are very badly seen. We are a threat for French society. I say this, but I still have
On met en avant les faits, puisque la France a un passé colonial.
we are see a threat because the French France has a colonial past that they don't want to assume, and that we have to include a lot more of this collective Antillean memory, from Guadeloupe and Martinique, whether it be from the French Antilles, but whether it be also at the national level in France itself. I don't know if we are going to succeed. If we're going, I don't know if we're going to succeed without any issues. It's going to be very difficult, and see how how it started with the current government. I'm very pessimistic on that. To complete what Michelle was saying, it will be difficult to be with the state that would obstruct that. We've already seen that there was a project of a school, of a Pan-African school that was in Guadeloupe, and it's the private sector that rejected the opening of that school because under the pretext that this school would threaten French democracy. And so it would value community terrorism, and it would be a question of trying to value our African, our Black heritage. It's incredible to see that how that would be perceived as a threat. And so in the end, we can see that we don't want our people to, they don't want our people to emancipate ourselves. People who are who are intellectually and emotionally emancipated are a threat to the state structure. And of course, so that's why we are here to talk about decolonization, and to talk about everything that you're doing right now. But you were brought up, you were raised in all of these. So for the young people, when I say the young, I want to say about talking about teenagers and adolescents who are being educated right now. What do you think they can do right now? Because they are seeing everything that you're doing, and they are seeing this emancipation movement. So what do you think that they can do? Because it's going to take a lot of time to fight against all this, and it's not accepted right now. So what do you think that they can do? If you have ideas on what they can do, and how is that going to change? All this going to change?
Ils ont beaucoup plus de repères.
As I said, I believe that they already have a lot more references than we do. I would have loved to have these kind of magazines with Caribbean when I was growing up, and that was not the case. I have to say, I think I didn't have enough resources, but I had my parents. I was lucky enough to have my parents. My parents were huge resources, and well, imagine if you had grown up in a different home who did not have these resources. Our way of being able to emancipate ourselves, to know our history, is very difficult. Except I think that the youth who are coming up, since they are being raised by mothers by mothers my age or Michelle's age, I think there's a work of awareness building who's done very early and very young. And I think that they have a lot more tools than we've had. And I hope that they will do something with those. And if everything we're doing today is for them, of course. Michelle? I believe the same thing as Tessa. And when we think about it, we need active engagement from the parents, but also that the youth themselves develops this desire to know more and say, yes, yeah, I was taught this and that. But, I'd like to look at what we're saying on whoever. It's this notion of curiosity that is pushing the youth to say, okay, yes, I've learned, this is what they taught me, but who are the other authors who treated such and such question? And I think that this idea that Tessa and I are doing, Tessa and I have had this aha moment, this desire to want to know more and to not stay with what the school. And this is how I learned that Christophe Colomb was at the beginning of the slave trade, and I did not know that, and I learned that through my own research. And so, if the youth are not who's happy to live, it's not going to work. So we need not only that the parents to be involved in this decolonization of the knowledge, but from that the young people can also look for themselves, to open his mind and to create this critical analysis, and to not
Par le gouvernement.
and to not only stay with what's at school, because of course the school curriculum is done by the government. So of course, and now I think that we have 5 minutes.
Alors,
On
je
a
vais
bien
vous
parlé.
demander comment.
We've talked a lot.
C'est important d'en parler, hein, c'est important.
I think it's important for us to talk about this.
Maintenant, je vais vous demander de
So
donner
I'm
vos
going to ask you
commentaires pour conclure,
to give our closing
de
remarks
partager avec les
and to
jeunes,
share with us, with the
parents
youth
comme
who have those
les
parents as
jeunes
like
qui ne
yours,
les ont pas,
and the youth who maybe do not have
dire
them,
qu'est-ce qu'il faut
and
faire
to tell them what should they
pour
do
continuer
to
ce processus
continue
de décolonisation,
this
parce que c'est très important.
decolonization process, because it's
Alors,
important.
qui commence?
So who wants to start?
Tu veux commencer, c'est ça?
Je laisse Michel commencer.
I'll let Michelle start.
Alors, tout ce que je peux dire, c'est que
The only thing I can say is that for me,
le savoir est une arme.
as they say, knowledge is a weapon. And we have to educate ourselves, not just because the national of the tradition proposed to it, but we have to go beyond that. We have to dig deep and we have to document ourselves, and this in a very judicial manner, because of course we have there's good and false information. So we have to choose our authors. So you want to look what the negmagazine and the Carai were proposing. And beyond that, for me, it's very simple. Once the youth will educate themselves and try to identify to whoever author, whatever ideology, and be able to do critical analysis, they will be able to have an opinion. And you can say, I agree or I disagree with such and such principle, and say, I feel or I define myself as whatever, and I see Guadeloupe to be either independent or whatever. But as Tessa was saying, the basis is education. It goes through that. That's what I wanted to say. So, thank you, Michelle. Tessa?
Moi, je pense tout simplement,
I
j'ajouterais
think that I will add only that I hope this generation
la mienne ou celle qui suit
will be my generation or the one after will be honest with themselves, will assume themselves, and will step out of this framework that was imposed on us, because it's very very comfortable to be French. It's very comfortable to have a French nationality that can give you certain advantages when you were. But to that, I don't think it's worth not knowing our history. Knowing our history is to awaken old wounds. And so I think that it's important that this generation assume itself. And as Michelle said, that they have to really dig deep. We have to go take what is ours and take over our space and take over our space, and to not let ourselves be dominated. And with that, I thank you. Thank you a lot. You are two powerful women.
Et j'espère vraiment pouvoir suivre tout ce que vous faites dans
And I would like to really follow everything that you're doing. And it's very important.
Elles ont dit à tout le monde, il faut aller vous assumer, il faut aller.
You have to say, you have to assume yourself. We have to dig deep and look in the important magazines, like as Tessa said, to see what is going on and to ask the right questions on who we are, and to not accept everything that was imposed on us. And so it's perfect. So thank you so much.
C'était un plaisir pour moi.
It was a pleasure for me. And before we leave, I think it's important that will stay prepared to stay a little bit. So thank you to everybody who followed us, and thank you to the interpreter, and thank you to the Black Consciousness Festival to continue all our efforts. Good night to all, and do your research.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation at the Black Consciousness Festival. All of our sessions are available on our website, theblackconsciousnessfestival.com, and on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. All of our conversations are intense, fun, enriching, and may also be challenging as we explore different facets of our history as people of African descent. Remember, you can find more on the festival on our website, theblackconsciousnessfestival.com. Have a good night, good evening, good afternoon, and a good morning, wherever you are joining us from. And remember to walk in pride, power, and practice. Thank you.